At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin. Of all the ways to die on a Tier 3 hazard world, Cadet Clarice Ridgely had a sinking feeling that hers was going to be the most embarrassing. She just couldn't stop sneezing. Her helmet's internal display flashed a polite, unhelpful bio-warning as another cloud of yellow pollen billowed from the crushed fronds under her boots. The air inside her suit, filtered by the Intergalactic Defense Academy's best tech, suddenly tasted of ground pepper. Her nose twitched, her eyes watered. She fought the primal urge, a biological betrayal ill-suited for a Tier 3 hazard world. The urge won. Achoo! 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 Wet, violent, and undignified sneezes rattled her teeth and fogged her visor with condensation. She stumbled and nearly dropped her pulse rifle into the alien muck. High above the razor-edged canopy, Cadet Celine Varesh hovered on silver Tavari wings that distorted the light like heat haze. A picture of effortless superiority. A smug grin played on her lips, audible in the airy condescension of her voice over the squad comms. "Trouble down there, Grounder? Is your fancy suit overwhelmed by a little local flora?" "The suit's fine," Clarice grated, wiping her visor with a gauntleted hand. "An enzyme in the pollen degrades the filter membrane." "Sounds like a design flaw of your species," Cadet Gar Vorn grunted as she shoved past. The wiry Zirfon used 2 of her 6 arms to push a thick vine aside, another 2 to steady her rifle, and the last pair to gesture impatiently. "Move it, Two Fists. The day is short, and your lungs are surrendering." Clarice bit back a sarcastic retort about Zirfan circulatory systems and their legendary vulnerability to barometric pressure changes. The comment would waste her energy. She stood as the squad's weak link, the fragile human mascot saddled to them. Arguing would only cement their opinions. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, the humid air of Olmira 7 thick enough to taste through her helmet. Drill Instructor Balius Volg, a mountain of scarred Zirfan muscle and grim disapproval, watched her struggle from a few paces ahead. He set his massive jaw. His 4 lower arms crossed over a chest plate scarred as if it had stopped a small asteroid. He heard the cadet's taunts. He saw Clarice's difficulty. He remained still. His mind called this the crucible, nature's audit. The strong moved past the weak, the first and most important lesson of the IDA. They found a defensible clearing an hour later. A small island of bare rock and vibrant green moss surrounded by the oppressive jungle. The air hummed with the sound of a million unseen insects. Balius slammed the butt of his heavy pulse cannon into the ground. The thud silenced the insectile hum for a moment. "Gather up!" he barked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in their chest plates. The 5 cadets snapped into a loose semicircle around him. Celine landed with a whisper of wings. Gar cracked the knuckles on all 6 of her hands simultaneously, a sound like a stepped-on bag of bones. Flynn Duff, the squad's Relan analyst, ran scans, his 4 delicate fingers tapping sequences across his wrist-mounted datapad. Beside him, Pijit Weiss, a Tavari with dull bronze wings, looked ready to swallow his own tongue. Balius tapped a command into his own gauntlet. On the inside of their visors, the cheerful green text of the mission overlay suddenly flickered and died. "Training simulation terminated," a calm synthetic voice announced. Stark red icons bloomed in its place. "Biohazard level 4. Uncatalogued carnivorous flora. Aggressive fauna detected." "Listen up, you useless collection of stellar debris!" Balius growled, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "The simulation is over. The safety net is gone."
Olimra 7 is live fire. The bioanomalies that we track are real, hostile, and will happily use your intestines for nesting material. Your objective: locate the source of these biospikes.
He pointed a massive, claw-tipped finger at a pulsing red waypoint on their navigational maps.
And neutralize it. Doctrine is your shield. The chain of command is your weapon. Follow my orders, and you might live. Get creative, you die. Is that clear?
Sir, yes, sir! They chorused. The words a familiar, comforting ritual in the face of stark terror. Gar, however, grinned. A real toothy, six-limbed grin of pure battle lust.
Finally,
she muttered.
some real fun.
Clarice felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach, followed by a hot spark that ignited within her. The end of the line. Holodecks in carefully controlled scenarios vanished, along with the good test scores that glossed over her physical shortcomings. Her father, a brilliant IDA engineer, always told her of humanity's greatest weapon, and it lay in the mind, beyond the fist. She believed a human could outthink any threat the galaxy threw at them. He died in a freak shuttle accident before seeing her prove it. Now, surrounded by aliens who saw her as a liability, Clarice would put that theory to the ultimate test. The deeper they ventured, the worse the air became. The pollen thickened into a visible yellow haze. Clarice's polite, suppressed sneezes gave way to full-throated, echoing explosions that made the canopy shudder. Each one felt like a personal betrayal by her own biology.
For the love of the 6 moons, Abacus, can you cease announcing your position to every predator in this hemisphere?
Gar hissed over the comms over a particularly violent fit.
I try.
Clarice shot back, her voice thick.
The reaction's involuntary. Try to involuntarily shut your noise hole.
Gar retorted.
Both of you, stow it.
Balius's voice crackled, sharp as broken glass.
Ridgely, control yourself. We approach the first signature.
Clarice's eyes watered so badly, her visor's overlay became a blurry mess. Her compromised senses, however, saved them. As she wiped at her visor, her ears, honed by a lifetime of tuning out background noise, picked up a sound the others dismissed as jungle ambience. A faint, rhythmic clicking. Heavier than insects. Coordinated. Balius raised a hand, a signal to move forward. Before he could drop it, Clarice held up her own.
Wait.
The quiet word, almost lost in the jungle's hum, carried such sudden, sharp certainty it made the entire squad freeze.
What is it, Ridgely?
Balius demanded, annoyance clear in his tone.
Sound,
she whispered and tilted her head.
to the left. 8 of them. Maybe 9. Coordinated movement. A hunt.
Celine scoffed.
I only hear bugs, Grounder. My auditory senses are 5 times more sensitive than yours.
Your sensors filter for known threat frequencies. Clarice countered, her brain racing to connect the inputs.
This is new. It's a low frequency. It's like bones on rock.
Balius moved to dismiss her when the jungle erupted. Horrors the size of large dogs, all jointed legs and segmented shells, burst from the undergrowth. Their serrated jaws clicked loudly, just as Clarice described. Sleek and black, they moved with a terrifying grace. They headed straight for the squad.
Contact left!
Gar yelled, a joyous war cry on her lips as she raised her rifle to charge headfirst into the fray.
Time to dance!
No! Clarice's voice cut like a knife. She lunged and grabbed Gar's upper arm with surprising strength. The Zifran was stronger, but the sheer shock of the act stopped her. They hunt by sound. They only saw us after my last sneeze. Go silent. Balius's eyes widened slightly. The creatures charged toward a single point, converging on the exact spot where Clarice sneezed. She was right. Before the drill instructor could give a single order, Clarice moved, her hands forming a rapid sequence of signals from ancient human special force manuals. A forgotten art in the age of encrypted comms. Pincer, left flank, 3 targets, silent takedown, go. She pointed at Gar and Flynn, then jabbed a finger toward a thicket of ferns to her left. She pointed at Celine and Pidgeot and gestured to the canopy above. She tapped her own chest and Balius's and pointed right. For a heartbeat, the squad hesitated. Their ingrained obedience to Balius warred with the undeniable logic of the human's silent commands. A clipped voice sounded over Balius's private comm channel. Flynn.
Instructor, her signals match a deep archive tactical library. Archaic, but valid. I will display an overlay.
Balius gave a single curt nod. Execute. A switch flipped. Gar's battle cry died in her throat, replaced by a predatory grin. She and Flynn melted into the ferns, their movements guided by the simple, brutal geometry on their visors. Celine and Pidgeot shot silently into the trees. Clarice and Balius dropped behind a fallen log. The effect was instantaneous. The creatures lost their auditory target and skidded to a confused halt. Their heads swiveled, serrated jaws clicking in agitation. That was all the opening the squad needed. From the ferns, Gar lunged, a silenced vibroblade in each of their upper hands. She became a whirlwind of silent death, severing limbs and heads before the creatures could scream. Flynn, with more deliberation, put 3 exact silenced pulse shots through the eye sockets of his targets. From above, Celine and Pidgeot dropped like specters, their own blades finding the weak points in the creature's segmented armor. Clarice and Balius took out the last 2, the silenced rifles puffing softly. The engagement ended in less than 30 seconds. 9 dead predators lay steaming in the humid air. The jungle remained quiet. The squad stayed silent. Balius stood slowly, his pulse cannon at low ready. He surveyed the silent battlefield, the kills swift and clean. He looked at the bodies, each taken down with clean shots to vital points. Then he looked at Clarice, who leaned against a tree, fighting another sneeze. His brow furrowed for a moment, a complicated surprise, a grudging acknowledgement of a variable he'd failed to account for. Flynn checked the squad's energy readings on his datapad. His usually placid face showed a hint of amazement.
Minimal energy expended,
he announced to the group.
maximum effect. The doctrinal response would have demanded a full-volume firefight, costing us a significant portion of our power cells and revealing our position to anything within 5 clicks.
He looked at Clarice, a new light in his eyes.
Her tactical assessment proved flawless.
Clarice just nodded and pinched the bridge of her nose.
Glad I could, help.
Their path forward terminated at the edge of a 50-meter chasm. At the bottom, a muddy, brown river churned with unsettling speed, carrying entire trees in its grasp. Thick, slick-looking vines, some as wide as a Zifran's torso, hung above the gap and swayed in the damp breeze.
Well, this is problematic,
Flynn stated, the master of understatement. He ran a quick scan.
The river's current is too strong for a safe crossing, and the banks are unstable. We would be swept away.
Celine and Pidgeot simply shrugged, their wings flexing.
See you on the other side,
Celine said with a wink at Clarice. With a powerful downbeat of their wings, the 2 Tavari were airborne, soaring across the chasm with ease and landing gracefully on the far side.
Show-offs,
Gar muttered, sizing up by the hanging vines. Her competitive nature took over.
Right. If the flyers can do it, then so can I.
Before anyone could stop her, she took a running leap and grabbed the thickest vine with 4 of her hands. The maneuver failed. The vines were coated in a layer of slick, greasy moss. Her grip, strong as it was, gave way. She slid down the vine with a surprised yelp, her legs flailing. She stopped her descent only by wrapping her entire body around it, dangling precariously over the raging river below.
Hold on!
Balius roared. He braced himself at the chasm's edge, using 2 of his powerful arms to grab the vine's end, and 2 more to haul Gar back to safety. She stumbled onto the ledge, covered in green slime and sputtering curses.
Okay,
She grumbled, wiping the gunk from her face.
new plan.
While Flynn began a lengthy, data-heavy analysis of alternative routes, and Gar argued that with a better running start she could definitely make it, Clarice was quiet. She observed the solution. Her eyes were on the tools they had, the gear, the vines, the anchor points. Her mind was a quiet whirlwind of angles, stress vectors, and friction coefficients. The tensile strength of that central vine should hold at least 300 kilos, even with the slick coating. She muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Her finger traced invisible line on her visor's display. If we loop a high-friction synth rope over it, create a simple traction pulley system, then we can haul everyone across. Gar snorted.
A pulley? I guess this is a death chasm, not a construction site.
Her theory has merit, I would say, Flynn interjected, looking up from his datapad. He'd clearly been following her muttering. However, the anchor points on this side are unstable sandstone. The stress from a pulley system could cause a collapse, plunging the entire apparatus and whoever's on it into the river. Clarice barely looked up from her calculations. I've accounted for that. We used 3 anchor points, not 1. The climbing pythons from the survival kits. She glanced at Flynn. It distributes the load across a wider surface area, reducing the shear stress on any single point to well within the rock's tolerance. She looked at Gar. And you, when you cross, use the momentum. Swing your legs up and kick off from the far ledge. It'll reduce the lateral strain on the anchor points significantly. Balius had been silent through the entire exchange, watching Clarice with an unnerving intensity. He had seen a dozen cadets try to brute force this exact kind of problem. He had seen them fail. He looked at Clarice's confident expression, at the elegant, simple physics of her plan.
Do it.
He grunted. The team, spurred by his command, moved with surprising speed. Following Clarice's clear instructions, they hammered the pythons into the rock, looped the synth rope, and secured it. Gar, eager to redeem herself, volunteered to go first. She strapped into a makeshift harness and, with Balius and Flynn working the rope, was lowered out over the chasm. She slid smoothly along the vine. As she reached the halfway point, she remembered Clarice's instruction. With a powerful grunt, she swung her body, planted her feet on the far cliff face, and gave a mighty shove. The sudden burst of momentum propelled her the rest of the way, and Celine and Pidgeot easily pulled her onto the ledge. The plan, a classic piece of simple, robust human engineering, worked flawlessly. One by one, they were pulled across the chasm. First Flynn, then Balius, and finally Clarice. As she unclipped herself on the other side, Gar walked over and stood in front of her. The larger Zifran stared down at the human, her usual smirk gone, replaced by a look of grudging astonishment.
Okay, I guess.
Gar said, her voice lacking its usual mocking tone.
That was clever.
She turned and marched off into the jungle without another word. For Gar, this was the equivalent of a sonnet. They moved into a new sector of the jungle, and the bio readings on their scanners began to spike erratically. The air grew still and heavy, the humidity clinging to their suits. The yellow pollen haze intensified, and Clarice's allergies flared with a vengeance. She discreetly popped a high-dose antihistamine stim from her medkit, the medical kick barely taking the edge off. The ground here was different. carpeted with thousands of small, pulsating, flower-like sprouts. They were a slick green that shifted to violet at their edges, and their delicate-looking petals seemed to waver in the air. They were, Clarice had to admit, almost beautiful. Pidgeot, whose nerves had been fraying with every step, was scanning the canopy for aerial threats. He failed to watch his feet. He stumbled on an exposed root, his bronze wing brushing against one of the beautiful little sprouts. Instantly, it lashed out. The flower was a trap. A sticky green tendril, moving with the speed of a striking snake, whipped out and wrapped tightly around Pidgeot's ankle. He cried out, more in surprise than in pain, and fell to the ground. "Hey, get this thing off of me!" Before his cry faded, the entire clearing erupted. A chain reaction. Dozens, then hundreds of the sprouts activated, triggered by the sound and motion. A web of lashing, grasping vines instantly crisscrossed the air, turning the tranquil clearing into a deadly cage. A tendril wrapped around Gar's leg. Another snagged Flynn's arm.
Contact!
Balius bellowed, his voice a thunderclap of authority as he fell back on years of ingrained training.
Standard doctrine! Form a perimeter. Overlapping fields of fire. Create a kill box.
The cadets, conditioned by endless drills, obeyed instantly. Gar, roaring in fury, ripped the vine from her leg and opened up with her pulse rifle, shredding the nearest sprouts with explosive bursts of energy. Flynn, more controlled, fired aimed shots at the center of each pulsating bulb. Celine swooped low, her own rifle spitting plasma. The strategy backfired spectacularly. The energy bolts seemed to agitate the plants. For every one they destroyed, 2 more sprang to life, their vines lashing with increased speed and aggression. The suppressing fire suppressed nothing. It made the web of vines more chaotic, more dense. A thick tendril snagged Celine's wing as she tried to gain altitude, yanking her from the sky. She hit the ground with a grunt, her energy shield flaring. Gar found her legs tangled in a half-dozen of the sticky green ropes, her powerful struggles only seeming to tighten their grip. They were trapped. Their doctrine, the holy scripture of the IDA, failed them completely, tightening the noose around their necks. Panic began to set in. Pidgeot screamed as more vines wrapped around him. Gar cursed a blue streak, firing her rifle wildly. Balius himself blasted any vine that came near him, one shot after another, but he made no progress. They were sinking in botanical quicksand. Clarice, however, was on the ground, shorter and having stumbled during the initial chaos. She was below the main swirling web of lashing death. The antihistamines made her head feel stuffed with cotton, but the adrenaline cut through that fog like a laser. She lay still, not shooting. Her gaze swept the chaos, and she saw the pattern. The vines attacked movement and energy signatures, but they all originated from a central bulbous stalk, and they had a blind spot, a weak point. Directly above the base, where the vine met the bulb, they were inflexible. They couldn't bend back on themselves. A simple biomechanical flaw. "Ceasefire!" she screamed, her voice cracking but sharp with absolute authority. "You're making it worse! Stop shooting!" For a moment, no one listened. The chaos was too loud, the panic too deep.
Cease your damn fire!
Clarice bellowed, a shocking amount of volume coming from her small frame. This time, they heard her. The shooting faltered. In the relative quiet, they could hear the whipping sound of the vines, now more menacing than ever. "You're feeding them energy!" Clarice yelled, scrambling onto a low-hanging rock. "They're drawn to it! Aim for the base! From above! Use your knives! Smash them!" To demonstrate, she brought the butt of her rifle down hard on the bulb of a sprout near her rock. It popped with a wet, disgusting squelch, like stepping on a piece of rotten fruit. Its corresponding vine, which had been reaching for her, instantly went limp and fell to the ground. For a critical second, nobody moved.
They were frozen, their programming telling them to obey their drill instructor, who was trying to blast his way out still. Malleus himself was about to roar at Clarice for countermanding his orders in the middle of a firefight. But then he saw it. He saw his strategy failing completely. He saw Gar, his strongest cadet, hopelessly entangled. He saw Celine, his fastest, grounded. And he saw the small human, standing on a rock, having calmly and logically identified the enemy's weakness in seconds. He saw the limp vine at her feet. He made a split-second decision that went against every rule in the IDA handbook.
Do as she says!
He roared, his voice leaving no room for argument.
Stow rifles! Blades and buttstocks! Aim for the bulbs!
The shift was immediate and total. The squad stopped firing and shifted tactics. Gar, seeing the logic, stopped struggling and instead used two of her arms to brace herself, while the other four systematically smashed the bulbs of the vines holding her. Celine, on the ground, used the pommel of her knife to crush the sprout that had snagged her wing. Clarice's calm, logical commands cut through the chaos, turning their panic into a focused, direct action. Flynn, Pidgeot's pinned! Clear a path to him! Gar, work the perimeter! Work from the outside and move in! Celine, get 2 meters up, just high enough for the angle, and call out targets! They moved like a well-oiled machine. They used the terrain, striking from above, systematically popping the disgusting little bulbs and clearing a path. Within 2 minutes, the threat was neutralized. The clearing was littered with limp green tendrils and the pulpy remains of the sprouts. Celine landed beside Clarice, her chest heaving. She looked at the human, then at the field of destroyed plants, then back at the human. A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay, Grounder," she panted, the nickname now sounding less like an insult and more like a title. That wasn't half bad." Valius strode forward, his massive form casting a long shadow over the scene. He surveyed the field of destroyed sprouts, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of Clarice, looking down at her. The entire squad held its breath.
Your observation,
he grunted, the words seemingly tasting strange in his mouth.
is adequate.
He paused.
Move out.
For Balius, this was a seismic admission. The rigid doctrine had failed where unorthodox thinking had saved them. As the squad moved out, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. They now saw a strategist where a liability had once stood. The biosignatures led them to the heart of the corruption, a place that felt profoundly, fundamentally wrong. A colossal, unnatural clearing in the jungle, a perfect circle of churned earth nearly a kilometer in diameter. And in the center, dominating the landscape, was the source, the mother plant. A grotesque spectacle, a living mountain of writhing, pulsating vegetation. Its base was a fortress of bark-like plating and thick, knotted roots. Above that, its body was a chaotic mess of tumorous green flesh, spitting vines, and monstrous flowers that pulsed with a sickening inner light. In the center of the mass, a central maw, large enough to swallow their extraction shuttle whole, yawned open like a gateway to a green, screaming hell. The monstrous flowers ringing the maw emitted a continuous, high-pitched shriek, a sound that grated on their auditory sensors and vibrated in their bones. The air had become a suffocating yellow fog of pure, concentrated pollen. Clarice's body reacted before her mind could. A full-scale biological mutiny. A violent, uncontrollable sneezing fit racked her body, one after another, each one tearing a raw gasp from her lungs. Her vision blurred, her head swam, and the world dissolved into a painful, suffocating mess. This was the source of her torment. This was her personal, botanical devil. The mother plant sensed their arrival. Massive vines, each as thick as an ancient earth redwood, smashed down from its upper reaches, shaking the very ground and throwing up plumes of dirt. The impacts were deafening, landing with the force of artillery shells.
Tactical retreat!
Ballius ordered, his voice tight with urgency.
Fall back to defensible positions! Find cover!
But they were too late. They were in the kill zone. A sweeping tendril, moving with blinding speed, caught Celine as she tried to gain altitude. It swatted her out of the sky like a bothersome fly. She slammed into the ground 50 meters away, her energy shield flaring brilliantly for a second before shattering, leaving her motionless.
Celine!
Pidgeot screamed. Gar let out a roar of pure rage and unleashed a full barrage from her pulse rifle, pouring a torrent of plasma into the creature's thick hide. The energy bolt sizzled and dissipated with pathetic puffs of smoke, doing no more damage than a child's thrown pebbles. Pidgeot was frozen solid, his wings limp, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it was almost sublime. He stared at the monstrosity, completely catatonic. Even Ballius, a veteran of a dozen brutal campaigns, was outmatched. He fired his pulse cannon, the heavy blasts actually chipping away pieces of the bark-like plating, but the damage was negligible. Trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. Their strength, their training, their technology, all useless against a biological force of this magnitude. While the others reacted with panicked, ineffective force, Clarice was on her knees, head bowed, riding out the last of her allergic convulsions. Her body was rebelling, but her strange, brilliant human mind was a storm of frantic calculation. Her gaze cut through the chaos to the rhythm hidden within. The monster's attacks followed a pattern. The massive, tree-thick vines struck in predictable three-part sequence, left, right, center. The maw, the screaming gateway to its core, opened widest just before the center vine struck, presumably to amplify its shriek. The smaller, faster vines that whipped around his periphery moved in predictable, oscillating arcs, like massive, deadly pendulums. A wild, insane, physics-based plan ignited in her mind. A plan of such ludicrous audacity only a descendant of rock-throwing plains apes could conceive. She checked her belt. One plasma grenade left. Standard issue, variable yield. She keyed the yield to maximum. That would have to be enough.
Ballius!
She screamed over the cacophony, her voice raw and hoarse. He was busy blasting a smaller vine that snaked around Gar's flank. He failed to hear her.
Borask!
She yelled again, pushing herself to her feet. He turned, his face etched with disbelief and desperation.
Ridgely, what is it?
I have a plan!
She shouted, pointing at the monster.
I need a distraction. Full suppression on its left flank. Everything you have, now!
What plan?
He roared back, dodging another falling chunk of earth. Flynn, who had dragged himself behind a rock and ran frantic tactical analysis, overheard her on the comms. His voice was shrill with disbelief.
Instructor, her plan is suicide.
I'm tracking her eye movements on her visor feed. She's targeting the peripheral vines. The probability of surviving a direct interaction is infinitesimal.
Clarice ignored them. Her eyes locked on Ballius's. In that single, desperate gaze, she conveyed everything. The silent hunt, the chasm, the vine trap, the undeniable truth of Doctrine's failure against her own logic.
There is no other option!
She screamed, her voice breaking but filled with unshakable certainty.
Trust me!
Ballius looked at his failing squad. He looked at the unstoppable monster. He looked at the small, sneezing human. He made the decision.
All units!
He bellowed, his voice cutting through the fear.
Concentrate all fire on the target's left flank on my mark! 3, 2, 1, fire!
The squad, including a hesitant Flynn, obeyed. A storm of plasma and pulse energy slammed into the mother planet's left side. The creature roared in fury, a sound that was part animal, part grinding metal. It turned its attention, its primary smashing vines and a swarm of smaller tendrils focusing on the source of its new annoyance. It was the opening Clarice needed. She broke cover. She ran directly towards the monster, sprinting across the trembling grounds toward the chaotic, whipping perimeter of its smaller vines. Her squad mates saw her move.
What is she doing?
Pidgeot shrieked.
By the 6 moons,
Gar breathed, her mouth hanging open.
the abacus is crazy.
Clarice never hesitated. She timed her approach, her eyes fixed on that one particular vine, thick as her thigh, as it swung toward her. She aimed for the end of its arc, the apex, the fractional moment where it would hang, momentarily weightless before reversing direction. Just as it reached that peak, she leaped. Her armored fingers closed around the thick, surprisingly smooth tendril. The force of the connection was a solid jolt that rattled her bones, but it was survivable. The world became a violent, whipping blur as she was pulled up and away, swinging in a wide, terrifying arc around the colossal beast. The G-forces pressed into her suit, threatening a blackout. Below, her squad could only stare, their weapons momentarily forgotten. They watched something that defied all of their combat training, all of their understanding of tactics. They watched a tiny human ride the limb of a god monster. Clarice ignored the dizzying speed, the gut-wrenching forces, the screaming of wind. The motion became a physics problem. A very, very fast physics problem. Her mind, a sanctuary of calm calculation in the heart of the storm, processed the variables. Oscillation period about 4.7 seconds. Velocity at apex, roughly 15 meters per second. Target, central maw. Calculate release point for a parabolic trajectory to intersect with the maw's opening cycle. She swung closer to the screaming core with each pass. A human satellite orbiting a sun of pure death. She used her body weight to slightly alter the arc, fine-tuning her path. She pulled the pin on her plasma grenade and held the spoon down with her thumb. The maw opened for its next shriek. 3, she counted, the wind whipping the world away. The maw was halfway open. The shriek began to build.
2.
The maw was almost fully open. The shriek was a physical force.
1.
At the absolute perfect moment, at the apex of her swing, she did two things at once. She let go of the vine and pushed off with all her might, tucking into a tight mid-air roll to stabilize her trajectory. And for a split second, she was flying. And in that second, with a lifetime of evolved predatory accuracy, the same instinct that allowed her ancestors to hit a running deer with a thrown spear, she hurled the plasma grenade. It sailed through the air, a tiny metal sphere on a perfect, elegant arc. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before it disappeared, swallowed by the screaming blackness of the monster's throat. Gravity reasserted its authority. Clarice hit the ground hard. Her suit's impact gel absorbed most of the force, but the blow still knocked the wind out of her. She rolled, dissipating the momentum, and came to a stop in the churned mud. A muffled thump echoed from deep within the mother plant, a sound more felt than heard. The creature shuddered. Its deafening shriek was cut short with a wet gurgle. All of its vines, from the massive tree trunks to the whip-like tendrils, went rigid, pointing skyward. For a split second, the battlefield fell into a pregnant, absolute quiet. Then, a brilliant blue-white light erupted from its maw. The mother plant exploded from the inside out in a silent, cataclysmic detonation of shredded vegetation, vaporized sap, and raw, unrestrained plasma energy. The shockwave, when it hit, slammed into them, ripping through the clearing and flattening everything in its path. Silence descended once more, broken only by the gentle, hissing patter of a thick green rain. Drenched, bruised, and covered in monster guts, Cadet Clarice Ridgely pushed herself to her feet. She wiped the green sludge from her visor with the back of her glove and took a deep, clear breath of the blessedly pollen-free air and let out the biggest, most satisfying, triumphant sneeze of her entire life. The cadets of Alpha Squad slowly and cautiously emerged from their cover. They stared, wide-eyed, at the massive, steaming crater where the monster used to be. The air carried the sharp scent of superheated sap and cooked greenery. Then, as one, they all turned to look at the small, drenched human figure standing in the middle of the devastation. Drill Instructor Balius Volg strode over to her. His usual imposing posture was gone. His 6 arms hung limp at his sides. He stopped in front of her, looked down, his expression unreadable for a long, heavy moment. Clarice braced herself for a reprimand, for a lecture on recklessness and insubordination. Instead, Balius spoke in a clear, formal tone that cut across the silent clearing, a tone for official commendations and battlefield reports.
Ridgely?
Clarice stood straighter. Sir.
Standard doctrine failed.
Balius stated, the words flat, factual, and utterly world-shaking.
Your strategy was unorthodox, reckless, and bordered on insanity.
He paused.
But it was also decisive. It saved this squad.
He took a deep breath, the words tasting strange but necessary.
For the remainder of this operation, you have tactical command. I will execute your orders.
The statement hung in the air, a formal declaration of a truth they had all just witnessed. The jaws of Celine, Gar, and even the ever-composed Flynn dropped in perfect synchronized unison. Pidgeot just stared, his terror replaced by a look of pure awe. The cadets had laughed at the human recruit. Now their drill instructor was taking orders from her. The battle continued. From the wreckage of the mother plant, smaller symbiotic creatures scurried, scuttling crab-like scavengers and parasitic flyers, disoriented and aggressive now that their host was gone. Before Balius could formulate a plan, Clarice's voice, now steady and confident, rang out. The hesitation was gone, replaced by the crisp authority of command. All right, listen up. Celine, get airborne. Your wing looks damaged, so keep it low. I need aerial recon on any secondary hives or nests in the immediate area. Call out targets of opportunity. Gar, Flynn, you're on me. We're forming a classic fire and maneuver line. We advance, we clear, we consolidate. Pidgeot, get your head on a swivel. You're on our 6. Watch for anything that tries to flank us. They snapped to it. There was no hesitation, no questioning glances at Balius. Contact rear! Pidgeot's voice was tight. His voice was a controlled report, no longer a shriek. He fired a 3-shot burst from his rifle, dropping a scuttling parasite the size of a rucksack before it could close on his team. He was still scared, but he acted like a soldier. Good kill, Pidgeot, Clarice called out, without missing a beat. Keep those eyes sharp! Gar gave a sharp, feral grin and fell into position on Clarice's right. Flynn was on her left, his rifle already up. They moved with a fluid cohesion they'd never possessed before. Clarice looked at Balius. The massive Zifron stood where she had left him, his pulse cannon now held loosely. For a second, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. Giving orders to her peers was one thing, but giving them to him, that was another. She swallowed it down. Instructor, she said, I need your heavy weapon on the right flank of our line. Gar will draw their attention, and you'll put them down. We move on my command. Balius Volg looked at the small human cadet. He offered no argument, no counter-suggestion. He simply nodded, his expression grimly professional.
Understood, Captain.
He took up his position on the line, his pulse cannon humming, and wordlessly followed the human's tactical direction. The journey to the extraction point was transformed. The hours of marching through muck were filled with a buzz of activity, a constant stream of conversation that centered around Clarice. Celine flew low beside her, her earlier arrogance gone, replaced by an insatiable curiosity. Seriously, how did you calculate the release window that fast? The angular momentum alone, my flight computer would have 10 seconds, perhaps, to process that? You did it in your head while you were swinging from a death vine. It's just math, Celine, Clarice said with a shrug, though she couldn't suppress a small smile and a bit of a good arm. Flynn, walking on her other side, quietly asked for the schematics of her pulley system. I ran the numbers again, he admitted, almost shyly. My initial calculations on the anchor point stress they were flawed. I failed to account for the load distribution you achieved. It was elegant. At one point, Gar came alongside and clapped Clarice on the shoulder. The gesture would have knocked her over that morning, but now it was delivered with a careful, respectful force that was almost gentle. Not bad, Ridgely, she said, the absence of the nickname Abacus speaking volumes. For a biped, she winked, one of her 4 eyes closing in a surprisingly friendly gesture. Next time, though, let me so the grenade. Well, if you can learn parabolic trajectory, we'll talk. Clarice shot back, and Gar actually laughed, a loud, booming sound that startled the flock of alien birds from the canopy. Even Pidgeot found his voice. He walked closer to Clarice than anyone else, as if proximity to her was a shield against the jungle. Captain, that hand signal you used, the one for a pincer movement, is that from an old Earth military manual? It is, Clarice said, surprised. How did you know? I read a lot, Pidgeot stammered. I thought it was obsolete. Nah, never obsolete, Clarice replied, looking at her squad, now moving as one. Just underappreciated. The wedge-shaped form of the extraction shuttle descended through the alien canopy, its landing lights cutting through the twilight gloom. As the ramp lowered, bathing them in the clean, sterile light of the interior, Balius Volg made his official report over a private comms channel to the IDA command ship orbiting above.
Alpha Squad reporting. Mission accomplished. Objective neutralized with 0 casualties.
There was a pause on the line. Then the disembodied voice of the watch commander.
Acknowledged, Instructor. 0 casualties from a Tier 3 biopurge is unexpected. Your report will require a full debrief.
Balius stood tall, looking out at the cadets as they began to board the shuttle. He saw them as a unit, forged in fire and led by the most unlikely commander he had ever encountered. He composed his final thoughts, the words cementing the day's events into the official, unchangeable record.
Be advised, I am submitting Cadet Ridgely for a field commendation for exemplary leadership and tactical genius under extreme duress. During the final engagement, standard IDA doctrine proved ineffective against an unknown biological threat.
He took a breath.
Standard IDA doctrine is designed to solve problems with overwhelming force. Cadet Ridgely solved an overwhelming problem with unorthodox intellect. I delegated tactical command to her. The decision resulted directly in mission success and the survival of this team. I request that her tactical models be reviewed for inclusion in the official command curriculum. She has command.
Acknowledged, Instructor.
The voice on the other end said, now laced with a note of stunned surprise.
Your recommendation is logged.
Balius cut the channel. He turned and boarded the shuttle. Clarice was the last one to walk up the ramp. She stopped at the top, turning to look back at the hostile, beautiful jungle of Olimra 7 one last time. She looked at her squad, her team, settling into their seats. At Celine, cleaning her magnificent wings. At Gar, field stripping her rifle with practiced ease. At Flynn and Pidgeot, quietly discussing something on his datapad. And at the massive, scarred form of Balius Volg,
who met her gaze from across the hold and gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. For the first time since she arrived at the academy, she felt like a leader. They, in turn, looked back at her as their captain.